Hello, hello. Welcome to another episode of A Pathway to a Regenerative Civilization. I'm your host, Reiki, and I've been taking you on this journey of how we can transition from the culture and civilization we're in today to a culture and civilization that's regenerative by design. And today is a very important episode. This one gets into regenerative villages. So Hypha has been all about building tools to help support this transition. And a big part of this transition into a new culture we're building is how we live and how we meet our needs and the communities that we're forming to be able to live into. And there are so many of these popping up all across the globe, whether they're eco-villages or intentional communities or new paradigm learning living centers or arts and innovation campuses. I mean, there's tons of different names for this same concept, which is a group of people coming together to reimagine how they meet their needs and how they create and build and grow in community. So Hypha's role is to build tools to support this. So that's what we're going to go over today, is a platform to help communities come together and create regenerative villages. So without further ado, I'm actually just going to walk through the platform because it's going to give you the best understanding of exactly what this tool is designed to do and how it can support the creation of these villages. So as you show up, we begin our journey. Everything we're building in Hypha is a journey. It's a game. And when we're talking about building villages, it's a group of people coming together to reinvent how they want to live. This is a game. This is a journey. This is a discovering and a reimagining. So that's how we approach this entire process in a much more gamified and joyful and co-creative way. And that's what this tool is here to support. So let's go ahead and begin our journey. So there's a couple different contexts that Hypha is building tools for, like an organization context or a bioregion context. You can watch the episodes on those if you want to learn more, but today we're going to focus on the village context. So let's click this plus button because we're going to create a new village. So what is the name of your village? Here you get to name it. The one we're going to walk through today actually has a name. It's called Artesian. It's an example village that we're co-creating with. So that's what we're going to have throughout this rest of this presentation. This is where it gets really interesting, is a village gets to create a token that represents either access or ownership of a myriad of different things that each village wants to attribute to this token. So this is where it can get really interesting, that you can imagine a village has one token that represents all the revenue that's being generated in that village. So now every village member and every organization and business that's operating in that village owns a share of the village as a whole. So you can think of this as like a cooperative village. Imagine if you owned a part of your village, then everyone in that community owns a part of it. And then they're all working together in syntropy to help build the value of their village. So this is endless possibilities of what we can do with this token, but this gives you the ability to just create one. And then we'll walk through how those tokens are distributed here a little bit later. So first name it and then set a max quantity. Sometimes you're requiring a maximum where you want to give investors an assurance that there's never going to be more than, say, 1 billion tokens. That helps them come up with a valuation. Other times you don't want to put a max quantity on it because you don't know how much value that village is going to capture. So either way, it's up to you if you want to create a maximum or not. So let's keep going. Next is you're going to create a unique voice and governance token. So that's one of the major things that Hypha has done, is it's separated the equity token, the ownership token, from the governance token. Otherwise, we're just creating oligarchies. If you can buy voice, then it's just governance by the wealthy. Hypha doesn't want to create oligarchies, so we've separated those. So you have a separate equity token and a separate voice token. So now you're going to come up with the name of that voice token. In Hypha, we call it Hypha Voice. It's pretty straightforward, but you can come up with whatever token you want. And SEEDS, it's called trust, because it's a way of distributing trust for particular ideas. So either way, whatever you want to call your token. Next is you're going to put the first accounts that are going to be part of this village. So these are the accounts that's going to hold the multi-signature authority to add new members, vote on the first proposals, etc. So if it's a group of 7 of you or however many coming together, add all the different accounts that represent all the initial members of that village. Now this is a really interesting aspect that we've added to this, is the ability to then list your token on the SEEDS decentralized exchange. So that you can have your village token and you could input how many you want to actually put on the exchange. And in that case, it'll create those tokens. So you could say, I want to create 100,000 of my village tokens and then put them on an exchange. So what Hypha automatically does is it says each village token is worth $1. So this is to help us conceptualize it easier. So if you've gathered $100,000 worth of value into your project, then you want to create 100,000 tokens as the initial starting capital. And if you want to list it on the exchange, then you could put 100,000 of those tokens, and then you want to put an equal amount in seeds in order to provide the liquidity for that exchange. So the next step, and all this does is it gives a way for people to then start buying your token and for you to start raising capital for your project. So this is an immediate way to be able to create a village, create a token, put it on this exchange, tell people to say, hey, go and trade your seeds or dollars or whatever have you for these village tokens, and that's how you get access to them. So if this token represents access to your project or ownership of your project, this is where you can tell your community and village members to come and provide support to get that project going. So we provide all the bootstrapping for this, and here's a picture of that exchange. All right, so if you want to do that, great. If not, just feel free to skip this process, and then we're going to click on Create. Next is put where your project is going to be, so you can plot it on the map. Finally, this is going to be your village card, so Artesia, like I was mentioning before. So you can click on the image and stuff and update your card. And then you can see all the other villages across the world. This is an example. Hypha isn't actually running with the villages yet, but you can imagine it might look like this very quickly once we get these tools out there. And then with the regular platform, you get to see all the other villages that are then using SEEDS and Hypha. And you get to go and either join other villages if you want, and then they go through their joining process, or go ahead and open yours. My face is actually blocking the card, but anyway, there's the open button. All right, so the first thing is people are going to be able to create and endorse proposals. So as a village is getting started, you have people adding value to that village to get it going. So it might be land. It might be someone's donated or gifted or contributed $100,000 worth of land to get this project going. So what you would do is say, okay, we're going to go and create a contribution for that $100,000 worth of land, and then they're going to get $100,000 worth of these village tokens, right? Or someone comes and gives 100 hours of their time to build the pitch decks, or a gardener comes and starts doing gardening and putting in time. Whatever the contribution is, all the villagers are going to be able to come together and start making those contributions. So let's see what this looks like. When you come here, you actually get to go through and see what are all the contributions, and all the current village members are voting on whether or not that contribution is correct or worthwhile, or if they want it. So it might be that a gardener's coming in and saying, hey, I want to do gardening, but the village doesn't need gardening right now. So they vote down that contribution and say, that's not something we're needing right now. So in this way, from the very beginning, all the villagers are in control of where the contributions are going, who's getting those contributions, how much they are, and all of these things. And this is a good way of doing contribution accounting. So it's a good way of tracking who's adding value to the project and making sure value is being reflected fairly back out to those contributions. So this takes care of the entire bootstrapping process of any organization or group of people coming together to do anything. And in this case, it's a village. All right, the next thing, this card's a little bit blocked, but it's enroll village members. So this is how you add new villages into your project. So you can see here, this is Hypha. You have people applying, they say whatever they want for the application. You can have your own criteria of things you want people to add. And then what it takes is a couple of assigned members within your village have the right to enroll other village members. So it might be the initial 7 or 12 or whatever initial village members are the ones that enroll new village members. So this way you have some type of gatekeeping to say who's a member of the village and not. All right, the next thing is to apply for quests or roles. So there's the contribution where anyone can come up and say, hey, I want to give X value. Do you find this valuable? That's one way. Another more healthy way is the current village members are suggesting what they want others to be able to bring to the party. So they get to say, hey, we're looking for 10 acres of land, and that's a quest. Provide 10 acres of land to this village, and you can earn X reward. Or we're looking for $10,000 of capital. Or we're looking for a gardener to come plant gardens, or whatever. So this way you're able to signal what you want as a village in order to grow the village. So that way you can actually send people to this portal, and they're like, hey, I love this village idea, I want to get involved. You're like, great, go look at what the current quests and roles are and see if anything fits for you. So they come through here and they're like, oh, there's an alliance integrator. local food abundance weaver. These are in the context of Hypha. These are actual roles existing within Hypha. But you would have other roles and quests related to your particular village. And then people can come through and apply for them and see what they consist of, etc., etc. Next up is this idea of claim your share of the village. Artesia is the name, again, of this village that we're playing with here. So they click the claim button, and this is how they get paid out. So Hypha's been a year and a half in operation. We've never had a bank account, and we've distributed over $3+ million worth of value. So we want to give these same tools to villages. So rather than spending all this time setting up legal entities, setting up bank accounts, and doing all of that, you can set up one of these due instances and immediately start doing contribution accounting and start doing payroll. So people can start claiming the value of that village. So this is the portal for coming and claiming your current assignments and contributions. And we'll get into the payment types here shortly when we go over the treasury elements. All right, so here, again, the picture's kind of cutting it off, but it says purchase Artesian Village shares. So this is how you buy access to this particular village. So we click the get button. Let's see if I can make this a little bit smaller. Okay, you don't want to see me too much anyway. All right, so here you have this get shares concept where you get to go through and select what currency you want to buy with. You have seeds, you can have a US dollar stable coin, you could have cryptocurrency, like whatever. So you click which currency you're wanting to buy the shares with. Here you're going to see the exchange details from the current local currency rate or the seeds exchange rate. And you can go ahead and buy shares of this particular project. So again, you can point your village members or your community or whoever wants to support this particular village that you're setting up. They can come here and start buying some of these shares of that village. Let's keep going. All right, next up is having the village map. This is extremely helpful to see all the different elements that are operating within the village. So you might have a group for doing regenerative and sustainable energy. So you might have a solar power farm here, and you have certain members, which are represented in these smaller dots, who are participating in that project. You might have a housing group that's building regenerative housing for the community. You want members are participating in that. Or, events or activations or, travel groups, financing, whatever. So this shows the organization chart of your village, who's contributing where, where people are playing, et cetera, et cetera. So this, when other village members show up and they're like, hey, I love working on housing, I'm a builder, I want to help start building in this community, they can come here, click on this, see who's already within that, category, and get in touch with them and start building and playing with them, right? Basic village tools. You can come here and see all the different tools that your village uses for collaboration and coordination. Here's a really fun one, is the news feed. So what's going on in your village? So what we're providing is this concept of a gratitude token or a love token, and it might come in several different names. But the concept is pretty simple. At the start of each cycle, people get X number of these tokens, let's say 100. Everything Hypha does is in cycles, lunar cycles, but villages can choose whatever cycle they feel most appropriate. But let's say at the start of every new moon, everyone gets 100 of these gratitude tokens. And then these tokens only mean something when you give them away. So holding on to these tokens mean nothing, and at the end of the cycle, it's just going to be zeroed out and you're going to get given 100 new tokens. But what's really beautiful about these tokens is as you give them away, we track where the flow of all this gratitude or love went. And then at the end of the cycle, you see who was given this gratitude, and then you could pay them with, either seeds or the village token or Bitcoin or dollars or whatever. So this is a different way of being able to distribute value throughout your village. What's beautiful about this is now everyone has something to give, and it doesn't take from you to give. So artists and healers and these people who typically have a really hard time charging for their gift because they don't feel like it's right, now they can just go out there, freely give that gift, and everyone has something to give them. And at the end of the cycle, they're going to get paid so they can meet their needs. And this village gratitude newsfeed is a way for people to be giving things to the community and being able to get rewarded and signaled for that. So, for example, someone goes out there and plants a few fruit trees along, Lover's Lane. They put that up and say, hey, I did this. I think it's really beautiful. And then people are able to give them hearts and send them gratitude. So they could actually earn some value for having gone out there and did that good deed. So this is how we can create that really virtuous culture, and so that people can show up, add their beautiful gifts, get rewarded and recognized for the gifts that they're giving, and create that culture of abundance. This is a huge feature that's going to be able to empower villages, and this is the idea of an intra-village exchange. So you can imagine, let's say you have a village of 10,000 people, and you have several different restaurants and shops and everything all operating within that village. First, what's really interesting is they all might own a share of the village as a whole, and the village as a whole might own a small share of every one of those businesses. So what it looks like is if you own that village token, you own a small part of every business that's operating within your village. And this is really beautiful because it aligns all the interests of all the village members. Now when that restaurant's doing good, you're doing good. When that business is doing good, so are you. So you have this incentive now to support local businesses much more than just the idea of supporting local. Now you have that financial self-interest too. That was loud. And what this does is it allows you to go through and actually buy shares of every business that's operating within that village that, of course, wants to be part of this technology. So maybe a new restaurant opened down the street. You went there and you loved it and you think this thing is going to be a hit. I actually want to buy more tokens of that restaurant. So you can go and say, hey, I want to get 100 more tokens, and I'm going to use SEEDS to do it. And this portal is what allows you to be able to support those businesses that way. And this is the same concept. We use a lot of the same UI elements and pieces to make it really easy to build and deploy this. But here's the village accommodation exchange. So this is a very similar concept for being able to buy access to the village, whether you're doing a daily rental or a monthly rental or however you're paying for your stay there. You could be doing it with a number of tokens. So maybe you're only paying with village tokens. Maybe, again, you also accept Bitcoin or crypto or dollars or whatever. So this is how you actually go ahead and pay for your rent for living there. So what's really interesting is we already talked about the ability to be able to contribute and give gifts to the village to be able to earn village tokens and otherwise. Now you can actually earn those village tokens for your contribution, turn around and use it to pay your rent. So this is what creates that whole cycle. So what we really want to see is villages where people are able to show up with maybe no money at all, add a lot of value to that village, and be able to earn their keep to be able to stay there. So this is how we lower the barrier of access to these villages. Anyone has value that they can be able to bring to one of these projects. And as long as they are showing up, they're adding value that the community feels is valuable, then they could potentially even earn more value from having stayed in that village than what it cost them to actually pay for their daily rates. And this is the vision that we'd love to see, is that ability for anyone to be able to come join one of these villages, add value, and that covers their cost of staying there. So anyway, that's just the exchange for doing that. Village material library. This is a huge piece that I feel like is going to be able to unlock a massive amount of abundance while also reducing the waste that we see in our culture today. So the majority of things that we're buying, we don't really use that often. For example, we might buy a $6,000 camera that we take out a couple times a month. Or hiking and backpacking equipment. That's stuff that we buy and we use infrequently. So what this idea is that each village is having a material library where they've got this library of physical goods that people can come and rent. So each thing requires a certain number of credits that you need to hold in order to be able to rent that. And this is how the library then gets sufficient value to be able to buy more goods and services and replace them when they get damaged, et cetera, et cetera. So you might have to come in and say, okay, I have 12,000 credits available. Renting this item costs 6,000 credits. So whilst I have it rented, I'm going to go down 12,000 credits. So anyway, let me show you this. It's total credits, 18,000. So I'm a member. I've already purchased 18,000 credits. Let's just assume that cost me $18,000, okay? It says I have available credits, 12,000. So what happens is this is how much more stuff I can rent before I have to return other items to be able to rent more. So then I could reserve this camera as well, and I would still have 6,000 credits remaining. Okay? So this is the limit of how much stuff I can rent before I need to return those items to be able to rent more. And then we have this other icon called health. So after every time you rent something, the health is going to tick down a little bit, and you're just going to pay a micro share of the item's cost in order to cover the wear and tear of that item. So that over time, as the health ticks down to zero, that the material library has earned enough additional revenue to be able to buy a replacement for that item. But what this means is that you're just paying a small rental cost rather than having to acquire that whole good and take on the entire appreciation or depreciation of that item. Now you can just pay a little bit of a fee when you're renting it. And this mentality and this idea is that we can then, every person of the village has access to this millionaire lifestyle for a fraction of the cost. Now we can justify buying really expensive things because they're going to break down slower. Their lifespan is going to be longer. So we want to buy things that are more durable, more expensive. That means we get access to these things, and more people have access to these goods, and they're actually being used more frequently rather than just purchased and sitting on a shelf. So this reduces the waste that our culture is creating while increasing our access to high quality, beautiful items. And all of this is managed through non-fungible tokens that track the health and who's holding that backpack, etc. So there's got a really cool back end for all of this. But either way, this is the concept that every village can have its own material library to give access to really high quality goods to the members. Another massive, massive piece, I know I keep saying that, but it is how the village is tracking its own health. So today, companies, they have very myopic and short-sighted ways of tracking the health of that company, whether it's just employee turnover or how much sales they made, etc. But when we're talking about regenerative villages, we need a different way of measuring what it means to be successful in our villages. So here we have the donut economic model, which tracks all sorts of ecological and social ceilings and foundations. So your ecological ceiling is how much your CO2 emissions of your village, how much you're putting off. So you can actually track that and say, hey, we've been releasing too many CO2 emissions. We need to pull that back down. So what you might do as a village is actually create tokens, your own carbon credits, for example, and start paying people who are sequestering carbon. So you can start balancing that. Or your material footprint. You might have a really low one because you're using that material library, but you might see it go higher and you're saying, why are we buying so much individual goods and creating so much waste? Maybe we need to use the material library more. But either way, starting to track a wide variety of different metrics that determine whether or not that or that village is regenerative or whether or not the members are happy is what's going to help us get there. Because we only get what we measure. So if we start measuring things like education and sanitation and nutrition level and life expectancy and all these things that are really deeply meaningful and important to the quality of life that we're living, then we're actually going to be able to start improving those things. This is a whole other talk all on its own, but I feel like you guys probably get the idea. All right, now we're going to open up the treasury. Something else that's really beautiful about all of these tool sets is it's all entirely transparent. So everyone gets to see everything that's going on. This is what keeps everything really honest and forthright so that we don't repeat the same structures our current civilizations are being plagued by, which is this everything's happening behind closed doors and a lot of scams and blah, 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 blah. So we get rid of all of that by showing exactly what's happening in the village and where funds are going. So here you see, this is an example of Hypha where you see all the different payments going out through, this last period. And then you have the treasurers, which are certain accounts that are held that are actually the ones that are making these payments and signing it off saying, yes, we did it. So in this case, we need 3 out of 5 of these treasurers who are assigned by the community to be able to make these payments to the community. So this is, again, just a fully decentralized, transparent, and open way of doing budgeting and payroll. Oh, yes. I mentioned that we're going to go over to the different token types. Let me move this down so you can see them. So in Hypha, we have 3 different types of tokens. We have SEEDS. We have Hypha, which is that ownership access token. And then we have a Hypha stablecoin, a US dollar stablecoin, which we call HUSD. So each village might have a similar makeup where they have their own village token, they might be using seeds, and they might also have a stable token for people who want to get paid in that. And then you get to see the total quantity that your village is holding of these tokens. And have a variety of paying people out. For example, with our Hypha token, when people redeem, the Hypha US dollar token, when people redeem that, they get to choose if they want to get paid out in EOS or Bitcoin or an Ethereum token. So they have a variety of ways that they can get paid out from that stable token. And again, this is us kind of building workarounds because Hypha was never able to get a bank account. So we had to figure out how we're going to pay a global team of contributors without having bank accounts and dealing with all of that. So it took us an enormous amount of time to build out this entire payroll process. But here it is, and it's ready for villages to be able to use and take advantage of as well. So this is another way of looking at the organization structure of your village. So you start from the things that really deeply matter to the health and well-being of the people and planet that are participating in that village scenario. So you create a different circle for education, a different circle for living, for agriculture, etc. And then you have people and different budgets set aside for each one of these areas. So this is where we start getting into the decentralized budgeting element of your village, where all the members are coming together to say, hey, we get to set our budget. I say we send, 10% of our budget is to education, 40% to reforestation, 20% to health, etc., etc. And every member goes and sets up their ideal distribution of value throughout that village. And that's what sets the initial budget, and then goes out and pays the teams that are operating within those domains. And you also get to then this is other stuff that if you go and watch the governance and the organization episodes, if you haven't already, they get into all the details of how decentralized governance and organization works. And that all applies for a village context as well. But you can defer your voice then. If you don't really know much about health, but one person in the village knows a ton and you really trust them, then you can defer your voice for all health related things. So anytime he's voting on something health related, you just follow his vote. And you might trust this other woman in the village to represent you for agriculture. So you defer all the agriculture-related decisions over to her for agriculture. But you are really, dedicated to finance, so you're going to hold on to your voice for that and vote for things that are finance-related, etc. So this way you can delegate your voice to people who you feel like will best represent your interests in each one of the categories that the village is making decisions on. So this is how we can start upgrading democracy and start making better decisions without overwhelming people with the need to actually understand every element of it, while it's still giving you full autonomy if that's what you choose to do. So this starts talking about the new capacity for tokens. So we mentioned these already, as you've got your village, coin, which is that revenue sharing or access or utility, like however you want to design that token. You can create an unlimited number of new tokens. So we talked about that gratitude token, for example. It's only limited by the imagination of different ways that we want to track and articulate different value flows. And very, very, very important is the idea of a separate voting and governance token that cannot be bought and cannot be exchanged, but can only be earned. So this is important because that means the village is being governed by the people who are participating the most actively in the development of that village, and not just people who happen to be wealthy or maybe just came to the village early, or et cetera, et cetera. Another huge component is this idea of badges. So badges belong to you. So whilst you might be doing a role or a contribution, which means you're doing X, you're getting Y, a badge says something about that particular village member. So for example, Hypha has this idea of Hypha treasures. So that's a particular badge. When you're holding that badge, that means you're able to do treasury, which was what we were showing you earlier, where 3 out of 5 of those treasurers need a sign to be, making the payments go through. Or you might have an enroller badge, and these people are the ones that are responsible for onboarding new members into the village and helping them understand what this is about. And that badge might earn them special bonuses or privileges within the village, et cetera, et cetera. So there's an infinite number of badges that could be created. You might have a healer badge that's going out there, and every time they heal someone, they might get some particular bonus or whatever. So badges are really cool because they're able to then start tracking the different things that we care about in our village. Feminist economics talks about how do we start capturing the value that's typically not captured in a current economic system, like, motherhood and a mother raising a child. Like maybe we have a motherhood badge, and every mother who has children gets this badge, and that automatically means that she's going to get paid X% per cycle for, providing that value of raising children in this village, right? So the sky's the limit of what we want to create badges for and how we want to articulate, value throughout these villages. Here's another concept, is the idea of inter and intra currencies. So why SEEDS is kind of fancying itself as an inter community currency, like between currencies and something that has no boundaries and can operate globally, it might make a lot of sense to have currencies that are just village based. For example, gratitude is something that is only a village based currency. If you're having those carbon credits in your village, that might be something that's only village based. You might have health tokens. So instead of just doing a generic UBI where you give out dollars to everyone, you might say, hey, we're looking that personal health is deteriorating, so we're going to issue personal health tokens. And only, personal trainers and organic food providers or whatever are able to accept these tokens as payment. So you can be very particular as a village of how you distribute value. What's really important here is it's all the village members making these decisions. So it's not like 3 people sitting in a room saying they know what's best for everyone else. It's all the village members get together and say, hey, let's create a personal health token and pay everyone $100 worth of value out there to focus on their personal health. And that might be an inter, currency or inter-village token. Again, the sky's the limits here of what we want to create and how we want to distribute value amongst our communities. Last piece here, because this is a big one, is like time banking, for example, or mutual credit, or all of these ideas for local ways of distributing value might be all intra-community currencies. Okay. This is just elaborating on the idea that Hypha is here to support all of this. So when villages step into the whole Hypha ecosystem, they unlock a whole world of technology and tools that are here to support them on that process. So the SEEDS Passport and the SEED Lite Wallet, they're both here as mobile versions to be able to access your village, participate in the do all that from a mobile setting, be able to send payments to each other, etc., etc. So Hypha is providing a myriad of tools to help support your village and your village success. That's why we exist. All right, there's a lot more to dive into. Last piece, I'm just going to touch on this, but I'm going to make a separate episode all about that, or about this component. But it's helping people go through the process of setting up a village. So we're calling this like the village builder game. So I'll just touch on the surface of it just to give you a taste of what this is about. So first thing, when any group of people are coming together and thinking about creating a village, is to get a full accounting of what capital that everyone's bringing to the table. And this isn't just financial capital. This is experiential capital, embodied experience, wisdom, etc. Intellectual capital, the knowledge and know-how of how to build a village or how to grow food or how to build a house. The spiritual capital, the know-how of how to hold space, like actually create a safe container for a village to be able to flourish. That social capital, having the connections and relationships to be able to build that village. The material capital, the resources, the tools, equipment, etc. The financial capital, money, the living capital, etc. So what you do is you go through and get a full accounting of all of the value that all the village members are actually bringing to the table. And this helps you get a full picture of what you have available to help make this village thrive. And what we find is when people go through this process and get a full accounting, they realize they have a heck of a lot more value to be able to get this village going than when they were just looking at their bank account. Right? The next thing, and this is incredibly important to do, is to actually go out and figure out what needs you're trying to meet, personally and within your village. So let's not get too bogged down on the physical needs, like food, water, housing, etc. We need to talk about all of our needs and how we go about meeting those. What's radically different about this village versus a company is a company says, we're just here to make money. And that's how we're going to indirectly meet people's needs, is we produce products, we make money, and then we use that money to potentially buy, housing and food, and potentially find love, and potentially create a significant life. But when you really look at it, a lot of these needs, they're not possible to be met through money. So these are things that have to be met outside of the money economy. But when you make them explicit and you actually point out what your needs are as a community, then you can go about designing the village to meet those needs. And this is how we're actually going to start getting our needs met, by identifying what those needs are and then going about a process of meeting those needs. I mean, it seems pretty straightforward, but it's something that is just severely lacking in our culture. And then finally, you come down and you say, okay, based on the capital that we have available, all the needs we're trying to meet, how do we go about meeting those needs with the capital we have available? And this is when you actually start accounting all the stuff that you have to make that village happen, who's going to be offering their time, whether it's, legal help or yoga instruction or, actually providing the land, whatever. Everyone provides something equal of upfront capital, and this is all done through those contribution requests. So this person would say, I'm giving $150,000 worth of value. It goes through a voting process. This person says, I'm providing a seed bank. I'm going to provide, 15 hours of work last week. Whatever. Everyone goes through and actually says what value they're bringing to the table, right? And then we can make agreements on the recurring contribution, which is necessary to get one of these villages off the ground. So everyone agrees what value they're going to bring recurring to make sure that this village becomes a success. So basically walking through this process in a very light manner helps people get a full understanding of what value they have available, what needs they're actually trying to meet, and then how they go about meeting those needs. And this Hypha tool is all designed to be able to support that process and make it a whole lot easier. So you don't have to worry about setting up the legal entities and dealing with the bank accounts and dealing with the payroll and contribution accounting and pie splitting and all this stuff that typically happens in any startup environment. The tool sets are here to support that process so that the members can get and focus on what really matters, which is setting up their village and going about meeting their needs. The final piece I want to touch on here is all of this is open source. It's meant to evolve, and within every Hypha game situation, we're encouraging every participant, village, organization, bioregion, whatever, to come up with new ways of doing things. So within Hypha, we use 80-20 voting. 80% needs to be in favor, 20% of the people need to vote. That's one way of doing voting. Every village could come up with their own way of doing it. They might say we want 100% consensus. Or we want it to be 50-50. We think 80 is too high. Or we want a completely different way of going about making decisions that's not voting at all. And all of this is what we call cards within the Hypha game. So you can create different cards and swap out old cards for new cards and recreate how you actually want to come together as a village and meet your needs. And Hypha just provides the foundation and basic tool sets to make all of that happen. So this is a whole lot that we just covered today. I'm incredibly excited about this because me personally, this is where my whole journey started before I ever got involved with the SEEDS and Hypha, was about villages. And this is actually what we see here is this, our neighbor good is what we were calling our first village. We didn't like the word community because community has so much built into it and everyone thinks something different, and that typically causes conflict. Anyway, this is really, really, really important to me because this is where I want to raise my kids. I want a regenerative village to be able to bring my family up in. I want to be able to have a community of all these other like-minded, pure-focused people who are going about actually meeting our needs and building a more beautiful world and being on the ground, touching food, growing food, like walking through a food forest to get to my neighbor's house. This is like why I'm doing this. It's been kind of a roundabout journey because as I realized that, like, hey, in order to do villages, we actually need to create a different time of economic and organization structure. After finding out 95% of intentional communities fail because they don't have tools like this to actually support them on their journey, so they're making the same mistakes over and over, then I realized we needed a protocol, we need a process, and we need a game to be able to help people on this journey of creating villages. And that's what all of this is about. So this is only the beginning. We're starting to roll out these tools. If you want to get involved in this process, if you want to help build out this UI a little bit better, if you want to add different tools, if you want to trial this in your village, get in contact with us and let's go about building regenerative civilization. So that's the end of this episode. Thank you all for attending, and I will see you all next time.